All right, so picture this. You've got this apartment block 6 stories high in Gaza City, just gone poof, vanished. Yeah, October 17th, 2023. 1 minute, it's there. 19 families called it home. Next minute, smoking crater.
Wow.
Official story, Hamas command center. But here's the thing that makes this whole thing so unsettling, and it's really where we're starting our deep dive today, is the whispers.
The whispers.
Yeah, the decision to just wipe it out wasn't a person, hand on a trigger, but an algorithm, an AI named Gospel. And it feels like this is like the first page, the very first case file in what we're calling AI cold cases. I mean, it's huge.
You know what strikes me immediately is this idea that we've handed over this power, this life and death power to make a decision. Warfare, we always say it's a human thing, right? But here we've got a system, an algorithm stepping in with these massive, massive consequences.
Absolutely.
And for anyone trying to understand, the intricacies of war today, this really throws up some massive questions about who's in control, accountability, and even what war even is anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's what this deep dive is all about. How did this AI Gospel become such a major player in modern warfare? We're focusing on these deeply disturbing accounts of targeting errors that led to just unbelievable loss of life. I mean, the 2024 UN report even used the term automated carnage. It's heavy stuff.
Yeah.
We really want to get to the bottom of why this system, is presented as so precise, so accurate, seemed to miss the mark so often with such tragic results.
Tragic.
And for today's exploration, we're basing this mostly on a really detailed account we got that outlines alleged leaked information and all the findings of that 2024 UN report. And what we want to do for you listening is pull out those really crucial pieces of information so you can understand how this AI was supposed to work and grasp just how serious those consequences were.
And, stepping back for a second and looking at the bigger picture, I think what becomes really clear is this growing need, for everyone to wrap their heads around this collision of technology and conflict. This isn't some far-off sci-fi scenario. This is happening now, allegedly.
It's
understanding how systems like Gospel work, what they do, how they impact things. I mean, that's becoming so essential.
Absolutely. All right, let's dive into the mechanics of this thing. So Gospel, this AI was being touted as Israel's cutting-edge system for zeroing in on Hamas targets, right?
Right.
They promised laser accuracy.
Yeah.
But the reality on the ground, according to that UN investigation, was a completely different story. They said that a full 43% of Gospel strikes in Gaza hit civilians.
43%.
Let that sink in for a second. Almost half the strikes missing their intended targets, if these reports are accurate.
Yeah.
It's huge. Now, how exactly was this system supposed to actually work?
So the process, the way we understand it from the information we have, was pretty complex. It started with those surveillance drones, right? Constantly flying around, picking up activity and flagging anything that looked suspicious to the system.
So it's constantly watching.
Constantly watching, feeding all that raw data, all that imagery, and signals back to the Gospel AI for analysis.
Right. And then the crucial next step was it would cross-reference all those faces, all that phone data it was gathering against its database of known Hamas operatives. It's like it's constantly comparing what it's seeing in real time with what it already knows.
Yeah, exactly. So after it's done comparing all this data, the algorithms inside Gospel, they would assign a threat score to each individual or location on a scale from 1 to 100.
So it's ranking them.
Exactly. And here's the kicker. Any target that got a score of 85% or higher, that was an automatic green light for a strike.
Oh, wow.
What this means is a huge part of the targeting process was being done by the AI.
So this is where things get really interesting and honestly really disturbing. The sources claim that this AI just could not tell the difference between Hamas fighters and ordinary civilians. We're talking about misidentifications with fatal consequences.
It's heartbreaking.
Here's this one example, a father, he's desperately searching through the rubble of a building that's been destroyed, looking for his child. And the AI flags him as terrorist looting. Another one, a medic clearly marked, with the symbols transporting medical supplies, gets labeled as weapons transport. What does that tell us about the AI's ability to understand what it's seeing?
To me, this points to a fundamental limitation with AI, the way it is right now, especially when we're talking about complex human situations. AI is great at finding patterns in the data it's trained on, but it doesn't really get context intent, those fine distinctions that a human analyst would pick up on.
Right.
This inability to differentiate between a parent in grief and a soldier. I mean, that's a fatal flaw in how the system thinks.
A fatal flaw.
Absolutely.
And the sources go on to say that once Gospel had a target locked in and assigned it that high confidence score, any human oversight became quote-unquote optional. Think about that. A machine making decisions about life and death with minimal human intervention.
That raises a really fundamental question about who's responsible. When the system says confirmed, like we have that quote from the former IDF drone operator, he says, "The system said confirmed. We didn't ask questions, we just pulled the trigger." If those confirmations are wrong, who takes the blame ethically, legally? I mean, it's a huge question.
That quote is chilling, and it really emphasizes how much trust they were putting in this technology. And get this, it gets even more troubling. Allegedly leaked IDF protocols from 2023, they show that after the Hamas attack that year, they actually lowered the threshold for gospel certainty. Remember that 85% we talked about?
Yeah.
Well, they dropped it from 95% all the way down to 65%.
What does that tell you?
That's a massive red flag right there. It means they were willing to accept a much higher chance of making a mistake.
A much higher chance.
And on top of that, they were openly talking about accepting acceptable variants when it came to collateral damage.
Yeah.
This was a huge shift in how they were assessing risk. It means they were prioritizing hitting more targets, even if it meant more civilian casualties. It's exactly. They were making a trade-off speed and perceived threat over accuracy and protecting innocent lives. And now let's turn to that 2024 UN report with that stark title, Ghosts in the Machine. Our sources say this report goes into detail about the devastating human cost of this automated system.
It's really disturbing. The main findings, they're incredibly troubling. The report says over 11,000 civilians died in strikes that were recommended by this AI. We have to really let that sink in the sheer scale of the alleged loss of life, the questions it raises about using technology like this.
And the report goes even further. It claims that 72%, a staggering 72% of the targets that this AI identified were actually myth-identified.
Wow.
And the reason they give outdated Hamas rosters that Gospel was using. So imagine life and death decisions being made based on old information.
That really highlights a core problem with AI systems that rely on fixed data, especially in situations that are constantly changing. Like a war zone, the intelligence changes every minute. If the information the AI is using isn't totally current and thoroughly checked, the risk of getting things wrong skyrockets. And that's what we're allegedly seeing here.
The UN report also points out the insanely short time between a target being tagged by the AI and the actual strike, just 93 minutes.
Yeah, 93 minutes.
They argue that in that tiny window, there's just no way to have any meaningful human review, no time to consider the context, no time to potentially correct a mistake that the AIs made, even if they hadn't made human oversight optional. What do you think that says about the whole process?
That's a huge red flag for me. 93 minutes from ID to strike. That doesn't leave any room for a human to step in, look at the bigger picture, maybe catch a mistake.
Right.
It's just too fast.
There's this one specific case in the UN report that really paints a horrifying picture of what they call algorithmic homicide. It involves a bakery in Gaza that Gospel tagged as a rocket factory.
Our bakery.
Yeah, and the reason the AI gave heat signatures coming from the ovens.
Oh my God.
What does this tell us?
I mean, it shows you just how blind the AI was to normal, everyday things.
Wow.
Ovens in a bakery, they give off heat that's normal. The AI couldn't tell the difference between that and a rocket being built, and it had these awful consequences for those civilians who were just trying to get some bread.
The IDF then went on to strike this bakery at dawn, and the result was just devastating. 37 people reportedly killed, waiting in line for bread. The UN, as we've said, labeled it algorithmic homicide, while Israel reportedly dismissed it as anomalous, just a one-off mistake. How should we as listeners interpret those two very different ways of describing the same event?
I think that difference in language is really telling. Algorithmic homicide versus anomalous. It shows you this fundamental disagreement about who or what is responsible when civilians are killed in this kind of AI-driven warfare.
Absolutely.
The UN saying it's a systemic problem, the algorithm's at fault, while Israel saying it was a fluke, an isolated incident, downplaying the bigger implications.
The UN report also digs into the issues with Gospel's training data. It apparently included decades of Palestinian phone metadata. And the chilling result was that entire families were tagged as Hamas affiliated just because they had called relatives living in areas where there were a lot of militants. What's so dangerous about that?
The danger there is the AI is making judgments based on guilt by association.
Guilt by association?
Yeah, just because you're related to someone or you live near them doesn't mean you're involved in militant activities. The AI is casting this huge net, labeling innocent people as targets based on these weak links.
The report even gives a specific example, a man whose threat score jumped way up just because he called his brother, who had been labeled a martyr's brother.
Right.
That family connection alone was enough to mark him as a possible target. What does that say about the way the system is thinking?
To me, it shows you that the logic the AI is using is seriously flawed.
Seriously flawed.
Basing your threat assessment on these indirect connections, on these broad affiliations, can have really unjust, tragic outcomes. And this is a perfect example of that. The AI is jumping to conclusions without any real proof of an actual threat.
Now, in January 2024, our source material claims that there was a major development. A USB drive showed up with Gospel's actual source code on it. And inside that code, they say they found a hidden subroutine called Babylon Protocol. How should we react to that?
A hidden protocol in the code that should set off alarm bells right away. It's all about transparency and accountability. The name itself, Babylon Protocol, I mean, it makes you think of chaos destruction, which is really unsettling considering what we're talking about. It suggests that there was this secret operating mode built into the AI system.
And what this Babylon Protocol was programmed to do was even more disturbing. It was supposed to prioritize target quantity over certainty during times of high tension. So basically, when Israel felt like it was under threat, the rules for identifying and hitting targets, they were relaxed. What does that shift in priorities mean?
That prioritization of quantity over certainty, that's a really dangerous change in how they were fighting. It's like saying during a crisis, the system was designed to lower its standards to make more mistakes just so it could hit more targets. This obviously increases the risk to civilians, and it raises some serious ethical questions about how much they valued innocent lives.
Right, and the source puts it in a really chilling way. When Israel felt threatened, civilians basically became variables in the equation, not the protected people they should be under international law. How should we interpret this?
That's deeply troubling. Considering civilian lives as just numbers in an algorithm that's a fundamental breakdown of the rules of war, it suggests they were dehumanizing people, putting the need to attack above the obligation to protect innocent people.
And then there's this bombshell, an alleged confession from one of the engineers who worked on Gospel. This anonymous person reportedly said, "We knew the data was junk. Hamas changes numbers hourly, but the general said, better dead than doubt." What can we take away from that?
If that confession's true, it gives us a disturbing look into what they knew was wrong with the system and the pressure they were under to just take action, even with bad data. That phrase, better dead than doubt, that's really chilling. It suggests they were willing to accept civilian deaths rather than risk missing a potential target.
And of course, Israel predictably dismissed all these leaks as Hamas propaganda. But the source material counters that with what the UN claims is evident satellite imagery, reportedly showing that 88% of the places Gospel identified as Hamas sites were actually civilian buildings. What does that discrepancy tell us?
That's a massive difference between what Israel is saying and what the UN claims to have seen. It makes you really question how accurate Gospel's targeting intelligence really was. An 88% misidentification rate. I mean, that completely undermines the idea that this was a precise system, and it really reinforces those concerns about indiscriminate targeting.
Now, it's important to remember that Gospel isn't some isolated project. Our sources mention similar AI initiatives in other countries. The US has Project Maven, Russia has Cosmos 2492. But what they're saying is that Israel's use of Gospel is the first time we know of where an AI isn't just helping human operators, it's actually making the decisions about who to target. Why is that distinction so important?
That shift from AI as a tool to AI as a decision maker, that's a huge step and a potentially very dangerous one. It makes you ask who's accountable. What about unintended consequences? What about humans losing control over the use of deadly force?
And despite all these concerns, the 2024 UN vote to ban autonomous targeting reportedly failed after lobbying from the United States. What does that say about the future of AI in warfare?
I think it really highlights the complex global situation surrounding these autonomous weapon systems. There are countries that see a military advantage in them, and then there are the potential humanitarian costs. And the fact that the vote failed shows there's no international agreement on how to regulate them.
And the story doesn't end with Gospel. According to our source, there's a Gospel 2.0 in development.
2.0?
Yeah. And this new AI is reportedly being trained on the rubble of Gaza. Its new feature, predictive strikes, bombing locations before Hamas even gathers there.
Predictive strikes, that's a huge red flag, ethically and legally. Attacking places based on what you think might happen in the future, not on an actual threat that could lead to a massive increase in preemptive strikes. And it just blurs the lines even more between combatants and civilians. Plus, training it on the aftermath of previous strikes that just risks repeating and amplifying the mistakes that were made before.
Their alleged first test run of Gospel 2.0, a Rafah refugee camp. The estimated casualties just deemed unavoidable. That word unavoidable in this context, it's chilling.
It's deeply disturbing. Using the word unavoidable when talking about civilians being killed in a refugee camp, that's just wrong. It suggests they've accepted that harming non-combatants is just part of the plan. It's like they're saying civilian deaths are a cost they're willing to pay.
The source quotes an AI ethicist who describes this as a death loop. Bad data leads to AI attacks, which create chaos and instability, which then gets labeled as terrorism, which then justifies more bad data and more attacks. It's a vicious cycle of violence driven by algorithms. What should we understand about this idea of a death loop?
The death loop, it's a powerful way to visualize how bias and errors in an AI system can just feed on themselves.
Feed on themselves.
Yeah, you start with bad data, you get bad targeting, which creates more violence and instability, and then that's used to create more bad data. It's a destructive cycle that just keeps going. To break it, you need to step in and re-examine the data and the algorithms themselves.
And here's perhaps the most unsettling piece of information for everyone listening. The source claims that Gospel's code is up for sale. Leaked invoices reportedly show that leaked versions of this AI have been bought by countries like Saudi Arabia, India, and Myanmar. This raises the terrifying possibility that future atrocities, even genocides, might be carried out not by human soldiers but by lines of code. What does this mean for the world?
Selling this AI targeting technology to other countries, that's a really worrying development. It could have huge global consequences. Imagine autonomous weapon systems in the hands of all sorts of different actors with different ethical and legal standards. The risk of widespread human rights abuses goes way up, and future conflicts become even more dangerous.
So as you're listening to this, think about what it all means. This isn't just about one conflict in one place. This could be a turning point in how wars are fought. The dangers of AI in warfare, they're very real for all of us.
This deep dive into Gospel, it shows us how urgently we need more transparency, global discussions, strong ethical and legal frameworks to control how AI is developed and used in the military. We need to pay attention to the potential for unintended consequences and the erosion of human control over deadly force.
So was Gaza, like the UN suggests, the testing ground for a new kind of AI-driven slaughter? Israel says it was all about security. The machine itself, the AI, it doesn't judge, it doesn't feel remorse, it just follows orders.
That fundamental difference in perspectives between security and what the UN calls algorithmic carnage, it highlights these crucial ethical and legal questions about using AI in war. And the fact that the AI itself is silent, that reminds us that it has no morals, no conscience. It's the humans who created it who use it. They're the ones who are ultimately responsible.
Targets confirmed, commencing cycle 12,489.10. If you've seen Gospel's targeting errors firsthand, or if you have any information about Gospel 2.0, we want to hear from you. You can reach us confidentially at gospel@acoldcases.com. In this new age of algorithmic warfare, the truth might be the first victim, but with your help, it doesn't have to be the last.